Good morning, afternoon, and evening. My name is Stefan Bartle, and this is the Economic Podcast for Gen Z.
Welcome, everyone, to another week on the Economic Podcast for Gen Z. This week, I'm very excited to jump into some topics such as economics, liberty, and dabbling in some economic theories as well. To join me in this conversation, I have Holly Jean with us. Holly, first of all, thank you for coming on the show, and can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Stefan, for having me on. So my name is Holly Jean. I was first introduced to the ideas of liberty and economics as a teenager. So quite some time ago, I stepped into my first economics course. I was 18 years old, had no idea what economics was, and I step into this class, and my professor turns out to be this hardcore libertarian. Never heard of that word, had no idea what it meant, but he started teaching about the economy through the lens of individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. And that was the first time I was ever exposed to any of these ideas. The first time that I learned that there was unintended consequences for government intervention in the economy. And honestly, I just fell in love with the ideas. I became completely obsessed. And after that class ended, I went to my professor and I asked him, where can I continue studying this branch of economics? Like, where can I learn more? And he sent me up to the DC area, and it's a university called George Mason University. And for those who don't know, GMU has the most free market oriented faculty in the world. So it was an incredible experience, opportunity. I learned a lot. And I think through that experience, it only just added more fuel to the fire. I always wanted to be a communicator of the ideas of liberty. And specifically for me, I love talking about socialism versus capitalism. Like that's where I just light up. That's where I can talk about it all day, especially everything that's happening in America today with the rise of democratic socialism. And we're seeing all these democratic socialists pop up in different states from New York to DC to Los Angeles and now Colorado. Like it has such a heavy influence over us. And recently, 2 months ago, I made a complete career change. I went from managing a nonprofit in the Liberty Movement for the past almost 9 years, which is insane. I went from that to just doing content creation, digital content, writing, talking about why free markets are better over socialism. And I'm seeing everything that's happening in the US today. And all I want to do is get on social media, get where people are at, and try to persuade them, try to win them over. And that's how I've come from, learning about these ideas for the first time as a teenager to what I'm doing right now, especially on social media.
Well, I mean, let's get unpacking and all of that. Do you maybe want to talk about some of the or current organizations that you're involved in and how this ties back into this tension that we're currently seeing in the culture, especially in Gen Z, between capitalism and socialism?
Yeah, for sure. So right now I am involved with Young Voices and also Young Americans Against Socialism. So Young Voices is a program that really trains people who want to bring the argument, the ideas of liberty to social media. I think Young Voices is on to something because they understand that young people don't get their news from traditional media anymore. We're not turning on, the television like our parents were back in the day. We're not opening up a newspaper to get our news. We are getting our news on social media. Like young people are getting their news from TikTok, Instagram, podcast, etc., which is insane. And in order for us to meet them where we're at, we have to take our ideas and meet them on the platforms where they're at. So this is what I love, and this is why I got involved with Young Voices. They train you to define and really sharpen your messaging, how to reach more people, how to communicate these ideas. And that's ultimately what we need to do. I think a huge part of us being able to win over hearts and minds to the ideas of liberty is going to take not only meeting them where they're at online, where they're actually getting their news, but also the way that we talk with them. Every time we hear like socialism versus capitalism debates, it's always like an attack. We always have to tear down the other side. And I think this is where we're getting it wrong. I think instead of us saying, Gen Z is lazy or stupid or they don't want to work, instead of attacking them, my strategy and my approach is to actually empathize with them. Like, they are right. The price of housing is insane. The cost to get groceries. I bought milk and bread yesterday and it was $15. Like, you are absolutely right to be angry over what you're seeing in the economy. But the means in which you achieve those ends, that's where the frustration and the anger and the resentment is off. We have to understand that government is not the answer, that free markets are. So, Young Voices really gives me that opportunity to really dive in there. There's so much to do, and there's so much that needs to be better said. And I believe that we should communicate with more empathy and less attacks. That's my approach. And I don't think that we can win people over by telling them that they're lazy, by telling them that they're wrong, that they're stupid. Like, we have to understand everything that they're saying. There is some truth to that. It's just that we need to teach them that government is not the answer for that. It's more freedom, it's more liberty, it's less government. So that's the first part of it for me. And Young Americans Against Socialism, yes, I started getting involved with them because, I mean, their mission is in their title. They're against socialism, and the rise of democratic socialism that we're seeing in the US today is insane. Just like I said, it's just popping up in all of these primaries, and it's winning elections across the US. So we have to be unapologetic in fighting against that. But again, I think the approach is where we need to kind of refine our messaging and kind of rethink, are these ideas actually winning people over? Or are they causing them to become more defensive? Are they causing them to shut out our ideas? And that's where I really want to be the bridger between the ideas, to be the connector. Like, hey, we want the same things, but let's look at it from this lens. Let's look at it through the lens of liberty. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing right now and working with both of these organizations. And it's been a huge just opportunity and also learning process for me. I'm not perfect at it. I'm learning how to bring that message on social media, but this is what we need to be doing, and we need to be doing more of it.
Thanks for giving that larger overview to the spaces you're in now. Concerning your milk and bread situation, I mean, that's clearly corporate greed. I mean, I'm sure someone has told you that eventually. In this
Yeah.
conversation, we're going to be using a lot of big words, and maybe we can kind of like help define it along the way.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start off with like the two defining ones for this conversation, capitalism and socialism. How do you define these?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Um, because a lot of the argument today is capitalism means greedy billionaires, greedy capitalists, right? So to really strip these down, capitalism is when there's private ownership over the means of production. What is the means of production? It's basically saying, what are the things necessary in order for us to create goods and services in the economy? And who are we giving ownership over that? So socialism, the socialism today, the democratic socialism in America today answers that question by saying it needs to be socially owned. We need to have public ownership over the means of production. And it is very scary because if you actually go on the Democratic Socialists of America's website, the DSA, if you look at their platform, they literally state this. They say that the largest corporations in America, it's their goal to make sure that the largest corporations are publicly owned and democratically controlled. This is literally the definition of socialism. And it's so important for us as young people to understand that sounds compelling. That sounds like, oh, wow, yes, what a great idea. Us as society should be the owners of corporations, of these multi-million-dollar businesses, because it's not fair that one, greedy billionaire, one greedy capitalist is the one in charge. But there are two things that we need to understand that come with that. And the first part of that is to socially own something is not what it literally means. It sounds like the public and society are the owners. But realistically, if we were to take over a corporation today as a society, as the people, we cannot answer the three economic questions together as a society every day. We can't be voting every single time we need to make a decision and say, okay, how are we going to produce it? What are we going to produce and for whom? We have to put someone in charge on the people's behalf. And this is where you have to understand why social ownership doesn't work. It sounds like the people are in charge, but we're actually putting the government in charge on our behalf. And this is where we get it wrong because we're giving the government more power to make those decisions for us. So it sounds like we are in control, but we're actually putting someone else in charge on our behalf. And this is where it all starts. And the second part of this is if we say that you, the entrepreneur, the one who made, the Stanley Cup, the iPhone that we use every day, if we say that it's not fair that you own this company, it's actually really greedy. It's not right. And say tomorrow, starting tomorrow, we're going to put society, the people, the public in charge. What does that do to innovation? What does that do to entrepreneurship? What does that do to the things that we literally, like, I have so many things in front of me, like the remote to my TV, a keyboard. Like, what does that do to the things that we literally access and take for granted every single day? We're discouraging them from creating new and valuable products. We're discouraging them from bringing ideas, pursuing profit in exchange for the value that they're creating. And this is the part we get wrong. We only see they're making billions of dollars, but we have to see the part that they're actually creating value. Both sides to that exchange are benefiting. We are voluntarily giving our money up so that we can have our Stanley Cup. Because I believe I'm going to be better off than keeping my $30 or $40 by having the Stanley Cup instead. And that's the beauty of the free market. That's the beauty of voluntary exchange, that yes, they are gaining profit from it, but that profit, think of what it's doing. It creates jobs. And what does the creation of jobs do? It makes sure that people have the money necessary to become employers themselves one day, to have more money in the economy and buy more things. And it sets up this chain of reaction where we're all better off. So just understanding that part, understanding that what starts with social ownership actually can work against us. It makes the government more in control of our daily lives, and it takes away the things, the incentives to create the things that we use every single day. And that's where it's very important to understand.
I think it's a very fair point to bring up now in the conversation. Well, one, thank you for helping clarify for the audience and for myself where we stand on these definitions. I find that a lot of the time these debates, often everyone's fighting and saying the same words and they're meaning 10 different things at once. For me in my studies, in my writings, and in doing this podcast, it has been one journey for sure. And the other thing is always for me, it's not a left wing versus right wing situation. I write many times that the current administration has involved itself with U.S. Steel taking a golden share, kicking out Nippon of its arrangement of U.S. Steel. More recently, the 10% acquisition of Intel. I think a lot of people they frame these institutions or these words in that capitalism is somehow a conservative right-wing momentous thing versus socialism is more of a left wing. You typically think of your AOCs, your Bernie Sanders, your Ilhan Omar's on this side. And in the last year or so, I've seen many a times JD Vance or Donald Trump will get on stage and they say, we're protecting semiconductors or this industry in the name of national economic protection. Or, for example, all last year we were talking about tariffs. You and I both studied economics, and we both know tariffs were an old thing that Adam Smith was fighting about. that served no purpose, that created a whole different institutionalized system for regulation that income taxes later solved for the US in 1913 and brought a whole different sweeping array of problems. Where I'm trying to go with this is that the firebrands on the left wing that are saying that they're democratic socialists, they get a lot of ticks and trends and a lot of hype behind them that I don't see that very much concerning free marketeers. Why do you think that is? Does AOC's marketing team just do it better, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and something we definitely need to ask ourselves because we need to understand how we get to the conclusion that socialism is the answer to begin with. We have to understand where it comes from. And the way that I like to talk about this and the way that socialists talk to the younger generations is something we need to pay attention to. So I like to begin with explaining socialism as a mindset. And there's three parts of this mindset that shape how we think about the world, how we think about the role of government, and that ultimately lead the younger generations to choose socialism. So the first step in choosing socialism is to convince the younger generation that the American dream is dead, that it doesn't matter what you do, what you study, it doesn't matter how hard you try in the economy, that the system is rigged, that it will always be in favor of the billionaires, of the greedy capitalists, that there's nothing that you can do. You are always going to lose. So why even try? And it starts with this hopelessness. And the hopelessness is a necessary step to convince them. Because the more that you convince them that they are hopeless, the more that they will start turning to government for the answer. So that's the first step. The second is that wealth is convincing them that wealth is not earned, that it's taken. And this comes from the famous, AOC quote that she uses all the time, that you cannot earn $1 billion. You can only take $1 billion. So it's this mindset that convinces Gen Z that there's no way that billionaires can make this money without exploiting their workers. That because we see these enormous pay gaps between the CEO and the everyday workers of that company, that is a result of exploitation, which is entirely, of course, untrue. The only way for them to profit is for them to have an idea, invest time, labor, capital, their resources, take risk, and eventually hire workers. The only way that they can earn profit is first by convincing people that they should voluntarily give up their money in exchange for that good and service that they're offering. And the second part of that is the workers. There are cases of exploitation, of course. If there is a situation of forced labor or fraud or coercion, those are actually cases of exploitation. But we're training the younger generation to water down this definition of exploitation. And that is dangerous because they see profit as the enemy, as evil. But when workers can voluntarily choose to work at a place, both of them can benefit. Workers are playing a vital part of making that good and service, but they are only a small part of the overall picture. There's so much more that went into creating this good and service. So workers are necessary. Workers should be treated, in a great way, but they are not. We are only choosing to look at a very, very tiny portion of it. So this is a necessary step that is important to convince younger generations to see profit as evil, to see it as exploitation. This is necessary. And the third step is to convince them that fairness means redistribution, meaning that if you first convince them American dream is dead, you're hopeless, you can't do anything. And if you convince them that billionaires, they're not even creating any value, they're just exploiting you, then that's when political power comes to play. That's when you turn to the government and say, it's not fair that you own this company. We, as a society as a whole, should own it instead. That sounds like the more fair approach. And it's convincing them that we must tax the rich more. It's convincing them that we need to rely on this model of redistribution of wealth. But of course, this fails every time because if you're not asking how do we create more wealth and you're solely focused on redistributing what's already existing, no new money, no new wealth is entering the economy. We're just so focused on taking from one to give to the other. And then, of course, all of the entrepreneurs and the billionaires, just like we're seeing in New York, leave. The more you do that, they leave. And it's important not to see the economy, important not to see it as a fixed pie. So I think this three-step progression is really so it needs to be talked about more. We need to understand what is the mindset that is getting them there to begin with. And this is the way that socialism is winning. And ultimately, this is what's causing Gen Z, causing the younger generations to embrace socialism. It starts with the way that we think about the world. It starts with the way that we see the role of government. It starts with the way that we look at billionaires. It starts with the way that we look at profit itself. And ultimately, this mindset is what's leading more Gen Zers, more of the younger generations to choose socialism over capitalism.
For me personally, it's always been interesting to just take billionaires without knowing them and just putting them all into one collective pile and saying that they're the bad guys. Um, in when we had when COVID existed, or better said, when we had the draconian lockdowns that didn't allow us to leave our house and pursue happiness, who was there? It was Amazon making sure that grandma, grandpa got their groceries to the house. Even prior to that, I was about 9 or 8 when the first iPhone came out. Steve Jobs was my absolute hero because we moved from BlackBerry and keyboards to absolutely touchless, touchscreen. Currently, Elon Musk, he's the only millionaire that I think I'll ever know who will put a Tesla car to a rocket and send it up to space, and that didn't cost any taxpayer money. For me, these are just three examples that I can come up with right now and just look at this and say, for all the wealth that these group of individuals have, it's not I don't find that they're just hoarding it or they're just like keeping it away from the public. I find that these innovations have manyfold changed our lives. Where would we be without the iPhone? That's just one example that I constantly use in discourse. Um, for me, building off on that, it was always very interesting in these debates and conversations between, the 1% not giving enough. I've yet to hear any politician really say, we want 10% of this or 5% of that or a concrete number that they can pay. Bezos had an interview 2, 3 weeks ago and said, give us a number, let's pay this, and let's be done with this conversation. And for me, it brings me back to the history of the income tax where it was supposed to be for the 1% at the time, and it was the valuation of 3 grand. And now it's trickled down to a whole bureaucracy that no one can understand without TurboTax or accountants. And it's created a whole different industry in and of itself. For me, what irks me the most about socialism and I suppose the revival of it or the hype around it concerning the midterms in the US is that it's been tried and done. I don't think America is any different in this. I'm a big fan of history. I love European history and the origins of socialism with Marx and the 1848 revolutions. And of course, you had the takeoffs of Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin and all of this in the 50s. And, that's not even that old. That's 80 years ago. I always find it really relevant because it's just a matter of time, I find, before a lot of these really truly socialist countries, I'm thinking Cuba or North Korea, like they eventually have to bleed into some market socialist mix that we have, hybrid mix. And that being said, I kind of wanted to ask you, now that we have the ground points done and how this is all becoming the hype and rage, when you look at, for example, I guess it's maybe in German we call it Sozialmarkt Wirtschaft, and it's like this mix between capitalism and socialism. More or less, it's like capitalism with a huge welfare state. A lot of people will point to Scandinavian countries and say that's kind of the ideal picture we want for America. But I think Bernie Sanders says this many times, actually. When you hear something like that, do you find faith in this? Do you find it's just the wolf dressed up as a sheep? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think when socialists look to, the Nordic countries as the prime example, this is what we're trying to imitate. We're clearly not trying to imitate Cuba or Venezuela. We don't want that because people can see that. If you say you're trying to imitate the socialism of there, of course, it's not. Socialism will have no appeal. But if you're saying these are the countries, these are the ones that we want to imitate, and actually seeing, obviously, the Prime Minister of Denmark responded to Bernie Sanders and said, uh, Denmark is not a socialist economy, we're a market economy. So just looking at the Nordic countries and specifically Denmark, just because you have a large welfare state, the way I explain it is that the welfare state is a factor. It's a contributing factor to socialism. It's not the only factor. And when you actually understand more of the context of how they got that welfare state to begin with, it is very different than what is currently being called by the democratic socialists in America. In Denmark, for example, it's more so that the culture there, first of all, is very different. The people want to be able to access things like, childcare and education and paid parental leave, and they're choosing to pay more through taxes to provide these systems for them. And there's a lot more accountability in their governments than what we have here, which is this huge, just, oh my gosh, how do I even describe the government here? We're just pouring in tons and tons of money into things that we may not necessarily even agree with. So the accountability and the culture there is very different. But more importantly than that, when we look at what socialism actually means, again, it all goes back to who owns and controls the means of production. And this is where, when we hear the democratic socialists in America say, for example, we're not communist, we're just democratic socialists, there's a difference, which they are right. There is a difference between democratic socialism and communism. But what they're not telling you is that their ideas can only pull from the communist system. They pull from what Karl Marx, the father of communism, has already stated, has already talked about. It's very similar, their argument. So when you look at what democratic socialists stand for, they say, well, we're not communists because we don't want to, abolish, we don't want to overthrow capitalism overnight. That's not what we're saying. Instead of overthrowing capitalism, because that's too extreme, we want to regulate and reform it. We don't want to have the government in charge tomorrow of every single industry and of private ownerships overnight. But we do believe that it's not fair that billionaires exist in a world where there's inequality. So we must put key industries, and again, this is where it starts. Key industries must be put to democratic control. We must give more power to the government here in places like healthcare and housing. Now, grocery stores. And the funny thing is, the not so funny thing is that list will always grow, but that's always the first part of it. They try to distinguish themselves and separate themselves from communism, but you're still pulling a portion of that. And then the second part is that, we don't want to confiscate private property. We're not trying to confiscate anybody's wealth. But we do believe that, we shouldn't have such disparities between income in the economy today. So we must tax the rich more because they can afford it. And we must make sure that we rely on this model of the redistribution of wealth. So of course, again, just like we were talking about earlier, we're constantly shrinking the pile that exists instead of focusing on how to create more wealth. So I think it really starts there. It's really paying attention to, look, this isn't communism, but seeing that one eventually turns into the other. It was Lenin who said the end goal of socialism is communism, which means that only difference between socialism and communism, whether it's democratic or not, is time. One eventually will lead to the other. It's the natural progression. It's the transitional stage to communism. So for us to say, we just want a portion of it. We just want our version of it, the most popular way to market it. It still comes from the same roots. It still grows from the same plant. It was Frederick Bastiat who said protectionism, socialism, and communism, they all come from the same plant. It's just a different stage of growth. How scary that should be for us. We should be scared that democratic socialism is what leads to communism. We shouldn't be asking, how do we get more of it? We should be running the other direction if we actually understand the history of it, if we actually understand where these ideas come from, because they all trace back to the same Marxist roots. And this is the harsh reality that Gen Z isn't being taught, and someone needs to say something. Someone needs to help them understand the relationship because it's literally the same plant, the same seed.
No, that's a great overview. I'm a bit rusty on my Bastiat, but I just know when a lot of young people, and I know adults too, when they think more government ownership is the solution or a key or a pathway or potentially a potential solution here. For me, it's always like, well, the US economy is currently how many trillion dollars in debt? We're currently entangled in how many conflicts? We can't manage what's written black and white on a document written in 1776. And now we think all of a sudden these same politicians can direct and manage and somehow make better a different system. And for me, that's always been like a clear signal where it's like government is irresponsible currently. The growth of government is accelerating, and it'll really lead to more irresponsibility. I have yet to find a true industry where government in the US exceeds. And these are all kind of my just litmus tests for ideas that are currently existing. Like I had mentioned earlier, US Steel, Intel, now AI is the huge hype between a 5% government share or a 50% government share. For me, it's like all of Congress is 50 plus years old. They didn't know how to spell artificial intelligence 3 years ago, and now they're all jumping at the roots to get to it. Um, Holly, we're winding down the episode right now, but I wanted to just ask a final question. Where can audience members find you? Where are you most active? What piece of advice would you give Gen Z?
Yeah, I really love this question. Um, the piece of advice I would give is Gen Z is not, I think we should be talking to and treating Gen Z a little bit differently. They are facing one of the harshest economic climates that we have seen in decades. The economic climate that we're seeing today is not the same as their parents and their grandparents. 42% of young adults are still reliant on their parents for money. That's a horrible situation and climate to be in. So I want to say, I understand the frustration. I understand how frustrating it is just to fill up your car with gas, just to get, milk and bread that I already said cost me $15 yesterday. You are right to be angry. But the one thing that I want to say is that I think we have the role of government reversed today. I think the question shouldn't be, how do we get the government to give us more free things? How do we get the government to, build more free housing for us? How do we get the government to, pay for our healthcare? Instead, we should be asking, what is making everything so expensive in the first place? What rules in society and the economy are making it harder to build more housing, to make the cost of healthcare more affordable? What sort of regulations, licensings, lack of competition exist? How can the government make it easier for people to succeed on their own? And I think this is where we have to understand the two different philosophies here. One philosophy says government should solve your problems, and the other one is saying, no, government should remove unnecessary obstacles so that you can be the solver of your own problems, because those are two completely different ways you are going to see the world and live your life. So the goal shouldn't be to make more people dependent on the government. It should be to make people less dependent on government by creating an economy, by creating an environment where it's easier for them to go out and make jobs, to go out and start a business, to go out and to provide for themselves and their families, so that we can be the provider of these things, not forever be dependent on the government for these things. So I think that this is where it starts. It starts with where we see is the proper role of government, and seeing government as a way to eliminate the obstacles around us so that we could be more of the provider and less reliant on government. That needs to be the core question that we're asking. And as far as everything else, you can find me mostly on Instagram is where I'm at. It's at Holly Jean So. I also try to publish a lot of pieces that are relatable, that are easy to understand. I don't get into a lot of like the economic jargon. Like I try to stay away from that and just be empathetic and approachable. That's my goal. So you can always, just type in Holly Jean Soto and see what articles come up. But yeah, and I'm always open to have conversations. So yeah.
Well, Holly, this has been an absolute pleasure from our side. We're definitely going to do this again. And for all those listening, I'd like to say thank you for joining. Please reach out to us at the Economic Podcast for Gen Z at gmail.com. We are also active on various social media, and we're also available on all streaming services. Holly, once again, an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.